It was the sort of December afternoon St. Mary Mead treasured, crisp, faintly frosted, and touched with that cheerful holiday bustle that made even the most ordinary hedgerows seem to sparkle. Mrs. Weatherby's annual pre-Christmas garden party, held outdoors each year regardless of weather, was the talk of the village, and by 3 o'clock nearly every resident had arrived, wrapped in scarves and good opinions. Small tables laden with fruitcake, hot tea, and peppermint biscuits lined the walkways, while a towering fir tree, decorated with silver ribbons, stood proudly at the center of the garden. Miss Jane Marple, wearing a sensible wool coat and gloves she had darned only the night before, took delicate steps along the cobblestone path toward the refreshments. She greeted villagers with her usual warm politeness, her clear blue eyes missing little. Though she appeared fragile among louder personalities, there was a steadiness in her manner, a quiet observance that made her at once comforting and formidable. There was no hint yet of the tragedy to come. Mrs. Weatherby herself stood near the tree, cheeks flushed with pride as she welcomed everyone. "Do help yourselves, and don't let the cold frighten you off. Tea is best enjoyed outdoors, I always say." "Indoors is just as nice," murmured Mr. Jasper Collins, the retired solicitor, though he forced a smile. "Oh, but the snow makes everything festive," added Lily Harcourt, a bright-eyed young woman home from her studies in London. "I'm certain this will be the loveliest Christmas we've had in years." She could not have known how swiftly that sentiment would sour. A crowd gathered near the Christmas tree, for Mrs. Weatherby had devised a quaint amusement. A large red stocking hung from one of the branches, stuffed with small presents which would be handed out after tea. A charming custom, everyone agreed, though several remarked that the stocking was somewhat too large. Conversation drifted from mince pies to London fashions. Children darted between adults, shrieking with delight as they tried to catch snowflakes. Through it all, Miss Marple observed the strain around Mr. Collins' forced smiles, the uneasy glances exchanged between Lily Harcourt and her elder brother Thomas, and the way Reverend Pike seemed to avoid Mrs. Weatherby's eye. Human nature, she often said, was like embroidery. Even the prettiest pattern held knots if one looked closely. Then, as the church bells marked 3:30, a small commotion stirred near the tree. Mrs. Weatherby clapped her hands. "Shall we begin? Time to see what surprises Father Christmas has left in our stocking." Excitement rippled through the group. Miss Marple stood beside Lily Harcourt, who radiated holiday cheer. Mrs. Weatherby reached up to the enormous stocking, tugged at its embroidered cuff, and drew out the first small parcel wrapped in gold paper. She laughed. A riddle book. Very suitable. For young Henry Pike. But before she could hand it off, something heavy shifted inside the stocking. The stocking sagged suddenly, pulling its branch downward. A few villagers gasped. Mrs. Weatherby steadied herself and reached inside again. My goodness, what? Her fingers brushed something that should not have been there. Her cheerful smile faded. Color drained from her face. "Mrs. Weatherby?" asked Thomas Harcourt. She did not answer. Instead, she withdrew her hand slowly as though afraid of what she had felt. Murmurs filled the air. Children fell silent. "Perhaps it's a joke," Mr. Collins suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "No, I don't believe," Mrs. Weatherby whispered. With trembling resolve, she pulled the stocking downward entirely. A body tumbled out. A small shape wrapped in a dark winter coat fell heavily onto the snow-dusted grass. A woman, lifeless and pale. Her blonde hair spilled across the ground like frozen sunlight. A blue glove lay askew on her limp hand. A scream split the air. "Good heavens, Edith Harcourt!" someone cried. "Lily's cousin!" Lily staggered backward. "Edith? But she didn't—" Thomas caught her by the shoulders, his face drained of color. Mrs. Weatherby fainted into the arms of Reverend Pike. Chaos surged as villagers rushed forward, only to be pushed back by dread. Miss Marple, though shaken, moved with quiet purpose, kneeling beside the still figure. "She is quite gone," Miss Marple murmured. "Poor girl." Inspector Graves, the village policeman who had been lingering near the refreshments table, hurried over, breathless. "Stand back! No one touch anything!" He crouched near Miss Marple. "Dead, is she?" "Yes," Miss Marple replied gently, "and not from the cold." Lily's sobs cut through the air. "But how could she be inside the stocking?" Mr. Collins demanded. A hush fell. The absurdity heightened the horror. A murdered woman hidden in a Christmas stocking. Inspector Graves tried to muster authority. "No one leaves. This is a crime scene." Miss Marple rose slowly. The villagers' panic swirled, but she was already thinking. The stocking, too large. Edith Harcourt, missing though expected. The Harcourt siblings' strained looks, the Reverend's odd avoidance, and the theatrical placement of the body. Her gloved hands folded. Her gaze rested on the stocking and the snow. Human nature, she reflected, often dressed its sins in ribbons. And somewhere in the frightened crowd stood the person who had done this. Indeed, panic rarely visited St. Mary Mead, and when it did, it behaved like any other guest in the village. Loud, nosy, and inclined to exaggeration. No sooner had Edith Harcourt's lifeless body been discovered than the orderly charm of Mrs. Weatherby's garden dissolved into scattered shrieks and frantic whispers. The fir tree, once a cheerful centerpiece, now loomed grimly over the scene, its silver ribbons fluttering like mocking reminders of festivity. Inspector Graves barked instructions, though his voice was near drowned beneath clamor. "Everyone remain where you are. No wandering about." His demand was impractical for a village whose greatest pastime was wandering, especially toward trouble. Yet the villagers did their best to cluster in groups, shivering more from shock than cold. Miss Marple, standing a short distance away, watched the ripple of reactions with grave attention. Mrs. Weatherby was revived with smelling salts and promptly burst into loud tears. "A murder! In my garden! Oh, I shall never recover from the shame of it," Reverend Pike murmured soothing words. "My dear, no one blames you. These matters are beyond any of us." Yet his hands trembled as he helped her to a bench, which Miss Marple noted with quiet interest. Meanwhile, Jasper Collins wrung his gloved hands. Hidden in a stocking, good heavens, what a barbaric whimsy. "Who could have done such a dreadful thing?" asked Mrs. Linton, clutching her pearls. Edith was always such a polite young woman. Thomas Harcourt, pale and rigid, answered before anyone else could. "Polite? Perhaps. But polite women have enemies too." His voice contained an edge sharp enough to cut. Lily Harcourt sobbed quietly against his arm, her fair hair shaking with each shaky breath. She had been fond of Edith, or so everyone believed. But sorrow, Miss Marple knew, wore many masks. As the inspector leaned over the body again, Miss Marple approached him gently. "Inspector Graves," she said softly, "if you permit a suggestion, perhaps it would be wise to note footprints before they are entirely trampled." He glanced at the muddied paths around them. "Trampled already," he muttered. "This garden's seen more shoes in the last 10 minutes than the high street on market day." "Even so," Miss Marple added with that innocent air she wore so well, "patterns may remain. One mustn't give up too quickly." Graves hesitated, torn between irritation and respect. Though he sometimes found her interference tiresome, he also knew she had a troublesome tendency to be right. "I'll have a look," he conceded. But Miss Marple had already shifted her gaze toward the Harcourt siblings. Lily was trembling violently, her distress genuine, but perhaps not solely from grief. Miss Marple noted the way Lily refused to meet Thomas's eyes, as though afraid of what she might see there. Thomas, conversely, stared fixedly at Edith's body with a fierce, unblinking intensity. Miss Marple? Lily's voice wavered. You knew Edith only a little, didn't you? A little, yes, Miss Marple replied kindly. But she always seemed a thoughtful girl. Lily nodded, but her expression clouded. Thoughtful, yes, but she had been troubled lately. Thomas shot her, a warning glance. Lily, not now. But Thomas, the inspector will learn it all anyway. Miss Marple intervened gently. There is no need to speak if you feel overwhelmed. No doubt Inspector Graves will question you both in due course. Thomas straightened, jaw tight. We will answer any official questions. Until then, we prefer privacy. Miss Marple inclined her head. Of course. As the siblings withdrew to a corner of the garden, Miss Marple turned her attention to the others. Villagers, she knew, rarely suffered in silence. In fact, they considered silence a form of disservice to the community. Already clusters of chatter had formed, each group constructing its own theory with the confidence of seasoned detectives. I heard Edith had arguments with her employer, whispered Mrs. Linton. Perhaps someone in the household? Nonsense, interrupted Mr. Ellis, the grocer. Young women don't get murdered over household disagreements. It's far more likely to be a love affair gone badly. Or robbery, offered Mrs. Finch. I heard her aunt gave her jewelry last Christmas. Mrs. Weatherby suddenly wailed from her bench. Oh, dear heavens, I might have served tea to a murderer. Reverend Pike murmured, My dear lady, the wicked can be charming hosts or guests. One mustn't expect a dark cloak or pointed hat. Miss Marple caught the faint tremor in his voice. The Reverend, normally so composed, seemed unusually shaken. She wondered whether it was fear, guilt, or simply the shock of seeing death so theatrically presented. Amid the chaotic conversation, Inspector Graves finally stood. I'll need statements from every one of you, he announced, and no one leaves until I say so. Groans and apprehensive murmurs rose, but most villagers complied. They settled along the benches or clustered near the hedge, waiting nervously for their turn. Miss Marple found herself beside Mrs. Linton again. Such a tragedy, Mrs. Linton whispered, and so close to Christmas. Why, I saw Edith only yesterday at the post office. She seemed perfectly cheerful. Appearances can be misleading, Miss Marple murmured, particularly when someone is hiding something heavy on the heart. Mrs. Linton gasped dramatically. You think she had secrets? My dear, everyone has secrets, Miss Marple replied with a small, knowing smile. Across the garden, young Freddie Pike tugged anxiously at his father's sleeve. Do we have to stay, Papa? It's cold. Patience, Freddie, Reverend Pike murmured, though his eyes were fixed on the stocking that still hung from the branch, swaying gently like a morbid ornament. Miss Marple noticed the Reverend's gaze linger a little too long. Meanwhile, Inspector Graves began questioning Mrs. Weatherby first, then Jasper Collins, then the Harcourt siblings, though Thomas answered more than Lily. Each interview produced little more than trembling voices and speculative observations. Yet Miss Marple felt the faint stirrings of familiarity, the tension between the Harcourts, Reverend Pike's unease, Mrs. Weatherby's insistence that her stocking tradition had no alterations this year, and Edith, poor Edith, whose presence in the village had been quieter than most noticed. When her turn came to speak with Inspector Graves, Miss Marple stepped forward calmly. Miss Marple, Graves said, rubbing his forehead, I suppose you have thoughts. Oh, a few, she replied mildly, but perhaps they are best shared later when the village has settled. People reveal more in quiet moments, I find. Graves sighed. Very well, but don't hold back anything useful. I never do, Miss Marple said gently. As the villagers continued murmuring, Miss Marple turned her gaze once more toward the Christmas tree and the stocking beneath it. Murder, she reflected, had an odd habit of slipping quietly into the most cheerful of occasions. But where there was deception, there were always clues. And in St. Mary Mead, nothing remained hidden for long. Inspector Graves had the villagers escorted, politely but firmly, back to their homes shortly after dusk fell over St. Mary Mead. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, settling softly on rooftops and hedges as though the village itself wished to bury the horror beneath a white veil. But fear clung stubbornly to every warm household, permeating the chimneys and curtains like an unwelcome draught. Miss Marple returned to her cottage at the end of the lane, where the kettle soon whistled and her fireplace glowed with comforting coals. She believed in the power of tea to steady nerves, but even she found her hands trembling ever so slightly as she stirred sugar into her cup. A young woman murdered, hidden in a stocking of all things. There was cruelty in the act, but more than cruelty, intention, a message woven into theatrical absurdity. She sat beside the fire, letting the dance of flames help her sort through the muddled impressions of the afternoon. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called. Inspector Graves entered, removing his hat with a sigh. Snow clung to the edges of his coat. "Miss Marple, forgive the intrusion. I find myself rather baffled, and when I'm baffled—" He gestured helplessly. "You come for conversation," Miss Marple finished kindly. "Quite right. Do sit down. There's fresh tea." Graves lowered himself into the chair with the weariness of a man who had discovered far more questions than answers. "It's the damned oddity of it. A stocking. Why would the killer display the body like that?" "To draw attention, I imagine," Miss Marple replied, pouring him a cup. "And to cause shock. Murderers often enjoy theatrical gestures when they believe themselves cleverer than the rest." Graves grimaced. "Well, clever they may be. I've examined the stocking and the area around it. Footprints everywhere, none of them distinguishable. As for evidence on the body, no obvious wounds, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest she was attacked there." "So she was killed elsewhere," Miss Marple murmured, "and later placed inside the stocking." "Exactly." Graves rubbed his temples. "But where? No one saw her arrive at the party. Was she expected?" "According to Lily Harcourt, yes. Edith was to join them shortly after preparing some holiday parcels at home. Lily insists she had no reason to suspect anything was wrong." Miss Marple leaned back slightly. "And Thomas Harcourt?" "Less cooperative," Graves grumbled. "He said Edith often kept to herself and that it wasn't unusual for her to be late. But something about his stiffness, well, it feels off. Thomas Harcourt is a young man accustomed to control," Miss Marple said gently. "Shock disrupts such men more visibly than others." Graves stared into his tea. "Do you know, Miss Marple, what bothers me most? Edith Harcourt had no known enemies. None. Everyone describes her as timid, polite, helpful." "People often describe victims so," Miss Marple interrupted softly. "It is human nature to remember the pleasant when tragedy strikes." He nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of her observation. Miss Marple continued, "Did the Reverend say anything useful?" Graves hesitated. "Reverend Pike seemed distracted. Claimed he barely knew Edith except from church, but he kept glancing at that stocking like it rattled him. A man of faith shaken by a symbol of innocence being misused for death," Miss Marple mused. "Understandable." Graves frowned. "You think that's all it is?" "Perhaps," she said calmly. "But perhaps not." The inspector sighed deeply. "I'll have to question the villagers again tomorrow, and the Harcourts, and Edith's employer in Much Benham." "I imagine you'll discover much of interest," Miss Marple murmured. "Christmas often brings old grievances to the surface." Graves downed his tea in one gulp and rose. "I'll leave you to your evening, but Miss Marple, if anything strikes you, anything at all, please come to me at once." "You have my word," she said. After he left, Miss Marple sat quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire. The inspector's frustration grieved her, but she sensed the heart of the mystery lay not in the stocking at all, but in the little tensions she'd witnessed during the gathering. Christmas parties, she'd long observed, brought out more truth than people intended. She recalled with precision the way Lily Harcourt had looked near fainting even before the body appeared. Thomas's hard stare at Edith's corpse, not of shock, but of something darker. Mrs. Weatherby's insistence that nothing about the stocking was unusual this year, though several villagers had remarked it was unusually large. Reverend Pike's trembling hands, and Edith herself, a young woman with a quiet manner and no known disputes. Too quiet, perhaps, for a village so accustomed to gossip. Miss Marple frowned softly. Young women who avoided attention often did so deliberately. She set down her teacup and rose, pulling on her coat. Thoughts were best clarified by a little walk, even at night. St. Mary Mead was safe enough. Murder notwithstanding, and the snow made the streets peaceful. Outside, the night was crisp. Soft lamplight spilled from cottage windows, casting warm squares upon the snow. She walked slowly, letting her mind sort itself. At the Harcourt home, a faint light burned in an upstairs window. Shadows moved, perhaps Lily pacing the room, or Thomas discussing the day with someone. Miss Marple paused only a moment. Too early for questions. She continued toward the vicarage. It stood solemn and dark, except for a glow in the study window. Reverend Pike was awake then. She saw him pass by the window twice, moving with restless steps. A troubled conscience, Miss Marple murmured, or merely a troubled mind. She retraced her path toward home, but as she passed Mrs. Weatherby's garden gate, she noticed something. The tree was still there, of course, stripped of the grisly stocking, but beneath it, missed earlier in the chaos, lay a small cluster of broken holly branches. Miss Marple bent carefully, examining them. Freshly broken, not from natural fall. Something or someone had forced their way behind the tree. A hiding place or a vantage point. She straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. Interesting. Returning to her cottage, she warmed her hands by the fire and sat once more. Now she had something new. Not an answer, but a direction. A murder, she believed, was never a single act. It was the final petal of a long-blooming flower. Whatever Edith had kept hidden had blossomed today. Tragically. Tomorrow, Miss Marple suspected, the secrets of St. Mary Mead would begin to unfurl like frost-bitten blooms beneath winter's sunlight. The aftermath of the Veilstorm's awakening did not pass quietly across the surviving fragments of the Eternum Empire. Its shock waves, some physical, others woven through the psychic lattice of reality, spread like invisible tremors. Yet the heart of the next unfolding tragedy lay aboard the warship Requiem's lantern, where Seraphel, Lord Maron, and Vera Kyle struggled to define the fragile path ahead. Seraphel stood before the ship's observation chamber, staring into the raw distortion left by the Veilstorm. Her golden armor reflected dimly in the glass. Doubt clung to her more heavily than battle weariness. Footsteps echoed. Myron's stride, precise and unyielding. His blackened armor bore fresh scars. You stare at the wound in the stars, as though it might offer answers, Myron said. It is not answers I seek, Seraphel replied. Only understanding. Understanding is a luxury, Myron said. We do not have time. Dominion scouts will come. And whose fault is that? Vera Kyle's voice cut through the chamber. She stepped into view, eyes faintly glowing with psionic residue. She had touched the Veilstorm and lived. Seraphel bristled. You accuse us, yet you were the one who heard its call. I did not summon it, Vera retorted. It was awakening regardless. Blame fate if you must. Meron scoffed. Convenient. The tension between them was a blade's edge. Their alliance existed out of necessity, Seraphel's authority, Meron's tactics, Vera's forbidden insight. A proximity alarm sounded. Seraphel turned sharply. "Report." A holographic display flickered. 5 Dominion war cutters inbound. "They followed the Veilstorm's echo," Vera murmured. Seraphel's expression hardened. "Prepare to intercept. We buy time for the fold drives to charge." "And if they board?" Meron asked. "Then we stand and fight." The Requiem's lantern fired first, streaks of blue plasma carving across space. The Dominion vessels returned fire, their red lances tearing into the lantern's shields. In the command spire, Seraphel issued rapid orders. Maeron took command of defensive phalanxes. Vera extended her mind outward, brushing against the Dominion ships. She recoiled. "There is something riding within their psychic field," she whispered. "A hunger." "A weapon?" Seraphel asked. "No, something worse." A violent blast shook the ship. Shields flickered. The Dominion vessels changed formation. "Boarding maneuvers," Maeron said. Seraphel nodded. "To the lower decks." The first breach erupted in molten steel. Dominion enforcers stormed through with shock lances crackling. Seraphel met them head-on, her blade blazing. Maeron fought beside her, each strike brutal and efficient. Vera shielded them with a shimmering psionic barrier. Then a new figure stepped through the breach, a towering being woven from shadow, its form shifting like smoke. Seraphel's breath caught. "What is that?" "The presence I sensed," Vera said, touched by the Veilstorm. The creature lunged. Seraphel blocked. Maeron struck. The creature dissolved and reformed behind them. It defied physical law. Vera hurled a burst of psionic force, staggering the creature. "We cannot kill it," Maeron growled. "No," Vera said, "but I can bind it." She pressed her palms to the deck. Violet light rippled outward, forming a containment field. The creature shrieked as psionic arcs wrapped around it. "Hurry!" Vera gasped. A tremor rippled through the ship. "The fold drives are charged," Seraphel shouted. "All stations prepare." "Then jump now," Vera cried, tightening the field. Seraphel activated the fold sequence. Light stretched. Space folded, and the Requiem's lantern vanished into the void. As the warship plunged deeper into chaos, the echo of exploding hull plating reverberated through its corridors. Crew members sprinted between stations, some dragging wounded comrades, others shouting updates drowned by alarms. The lantern had survived worse battles, but never with stakes like this. The Veilstorm's influence lingered like a curse, unsettling even hardened veterans. Seraphel's thoughts churned as she fought. Each Dominion soldier cut down carried echoes of past wars, of empires fallen and rebuilt. She remembered the Eternum Empire's doctrine: endure, adapt, dominate. Yet the ideals she once served now felt like relics of a distant age. The Veilstorm had shown her something raw, an ancient power, indifferent to empires or heroes. Maeron, for his part, fought with cold precision. Every strike of his great blade was deliberate, calculated. He had once commanded legions that burned continents into ash, but now he fought in narrow corridors beside those he barely trusted. Yet there was no hesitation in him. Survival required unity, even if temporary. Vera felt the weight of the Veilstorm's whisper even now. Since touching it, its echoes had threaded into her thoughts, sometimes murmuring, sometimes roaring. It had shown her glimpses of impossible futures. Galaxies collapsing, stars devoured by spiraling voids. But it had also shown her one fragile strand of hope, a path that required Seraphel and Maeron, despite their doubts. The Dominion enforcers pressed harder, their formations relentless. They were not merely soldiers, they were zealots, conditioned to obey without question. Their commanders believed the Veilstorm could be harnessed, controlled, weaponized, and to achieve that, they would tear galaxies apart. As another bulkhead cracked open, Seraphel felt a moment's fear, not for herself, but for the galaxy should the Dominion succeed. The Veil Storm was not an asset. It was a wound in existence. She struck with renewed intensity, driving enemies back. "Meron, hold the flank," he answered with a curt nod, pushing forward to intercept a fresh wave. Vera's containment field tightened around the shadow creature, but fractures spread through her psychic barrier. The strain clawed at her mind. She tasted iron. She knew she could not hold it indefinitely. "Seraphel," she whispered, "if we do not jump now, this creature will break free." Seraphel understood. They were seconds from collapse, physically, strategically, psychically. She slammed her gauntleted fist onto the emergency relay panel, overriding safety protocols. The ship's engines roared. Flares of unstable energy crawled across the deck. "Brace yourselves," Seraphel shouted. The lantern's fold drive surged, bending the fabric of reality. The shadow creature thrashed violently against its containment as the ship slipped. Between the folds of space, its scream fading into the distortion. Yet greater danger still lay ahead. The citadel of ash rose like a wounded giant upon the volcanic plain of Varos IV, its obsidian towers jutting from the scorched earth like the ribs of some ancient behemoth long buried beneath the crust. Even from a distance, the fortress radiated a palpable wrongness, an echo of forgotten wars, dead gods, and oaths broken so thoroughly that the very stone still whispered them in mourning. For Lord Marshal Kael'Varin, the sight stirred equal parts dread and grim determination. He had come here seeking answers, though deep within he feared the truths waiting inside would break him more brutally than any battlefield ever had. Varos Hafer's acrid wind clawed against his armor as he dismounted, the ground trembling beneath his boots with the distant rumble of the planet's unstable core. Behind him, the remnants of his honor guard formed a protective cordon, their silvered plate battered from the battles of the past weeks. Only 8 remained of the 100 who had sworn to follow him into the storm. They did not speak. They were far beyond the need for words. They knew, as Kyle knew, that this place marked the turning of their fate. The doors of the citadel groaned open at their approach, though none had touched them. The air inside flowed outward like a cold exhalation from the mouth of a tomb. Kyle felt an instinctive shudder crawl down his spine. Something inside the fortress was awake, aware, and waiting. "Stay alert," he said, though his warriors hardly needed the reminder. The interior of the citadel was a labyrinth of echoing halls carved from polished black stone, each passage adorned with runes that throbbed faintly with dull red light. The architecture felt impossibly old, predating even the earliest records of the Celestial Empire. Kyle moved with slow, deliberate steps, his gauntleted fingers brushing the wall as if seeking a memory he could not fully grasp. His mind drifted to the betrayal at Asterian Reach, where a trusted ally had turned upon him in a moment that still haunted his dreams, to the whispered accusations in the Imperial Council chambers, to the Emperor's cold, unreadable gaze before Kael had been ordered to Varosvorf with little explanation. Everything had spiraled since then, each loss threading deeper into a web he could no longer untangle. The runes on the walls flared brighter as he advanced. "They recognize you," murmured Captain Lysa Torren, her voice a low rasp. "Or they recognize something inside you." Kyle did not answer. Instead, he allowed the walls to guide him, following the pulsing crimson glow that intensified the deeper they went. At last, the corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, the Hall of Echoes. A towering monolith stood at its center, formed from the same impossible obsidian as the citadel itself, yet alive with shifting patterns of crimson light. It hummed, with ancient energy, vibrating through the bones of all who entered. Kyle approached. The monolith responded. A wave of psychic force rippled outward, sending several of his guards staggering. Images flashed through Kyle's mind, Visions of cities burning beneath starless skies, empires collapsing in an instant, armies locked in final hopeless struggle. Then a single image lingered, a figure draped in a cloak of fractured light, reaching toward him. He inhaled sharply and steadied himself. "Lord Marshal," Captain Torrin said, her hand on her blade. "What is it showing you?" Kyle hesitated. Possibility or warning? The monolith's surface reshaped, forming runes in a language he did not know yet understood perfectly. The cycle returns. The shadow remembers. The marked will decide. Kyle's heart hammered. "Marked," he whispered. As if in answer, the monolith unleashed another wave of energy, this one softer, almost inquisitive. It washed over Kyle alone, seeping through the seams of his armor like liquid fire. He gasped as a symbol burned itself across his mind, a spiral of 3 interlocking paths, each bending toward a void at the center. Pain flared. Memory shattered and rebuilt itself in an instant. And then he understood. He had seen this symbol once before, in the ruins beneath Celestis Prime, etched into a sarcophagus older than humanity's recorded history. Scholars had speculated it represented a forgotten religion or extinct species. But Kyle now knew the truth. It was not the mark of something extinct. It was the mark of something returning. He staggered, bracing himself against the monolith as images poured through him, the Emperor's hidden fear, the Council's whispered conspiracies, and the unseen hand guiding the tragedies that had befallen the Empire. Threads connected, weaving into a tapestry of dread clarity. "It is a conduit," Kale breathed, "a beacon for the ones who came before, and who will come again." Captain Torrin stepped forward, concern etched across her scarred face. "My lord, what does that mean for us?" Kyle turned to her, his eyes heavy with newfound weight. "It means the Empire stands upon a precipice far greater than civil war, and I—" He paused, struggling to accept the truth. "I'm bound to this, marked to play a role I do not yet understand." The citadel trembled. Dust drifted from the vaulted ceiling like falling ash. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber as the runes along the walls blazed with sudden intensity. Kyle's guards tensed. "Is it collapsing?" one asked. "No," Kyle said slowly. "It is awakening." A fissure cracked open along the floor, revealing a staircase descending into blinding crimson light. The monolith pulsed once more, inviting, insistent. The path forward. Kyle's pulse steadied with grim resolve. Whatever lay below, it was the key to understanding the threat rising against the Empire. And the truth of the force that had chosen him. He turned to his remaining warriors. "This is the threshold," he said. "I will go alone." Captain Torrin stepped forward sharply. "Absolutely not. This burden is mine." Kyle cut in, voice firm but not unkind. "If the power down there senses fear, doubt, or divided purpose, it may reject me, or worse." Torrin clenched her jaw but bowed her head. "Then we will hold this chamber and pray the fates are kinder to you than they have been to us." Kyle allowed himself the faintest smile, one born of exhaustion rather than comfort. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "know that your loyalty has been the one truth I have never questioned." With that, he turned and descended into the crimson light, leaving behind the echoes of the past and stepping toward a future steeped in darkness, revelation, and fate. Kyle descended the spiral staircase, each step drawing him deeper into the crimson vault's hidden core. The walls around him shifted subtly, almost breathing, as if the citadel itself watched his descent. A dim red glow pulsed from runes carved into the stone, illuminating the path with a heartbeat-like rhythm. At the base of the staircase, the chamber opened into a vast subterranean hall carved into the very roots of the planet. Columns of molten rock coursed along channels in the floor, illuminating a towering structure at the chamber's center. It resembled a cocoon of obsidian threads, wrapped around a throne-like shape that hovered above the ground. Crimson energy weaved through its skeletal frame, pulsing with the same rhythm he had felt since entering the citadel. Kyle approached cautiously, sensing the momentous power coiled within. As he stepped closer, the cocoon responded. The threads of obsidian unwound like serpents, slithering back to reveal the throne fully. It was crafted from black crystal and veined with glowing red sigils that shifted like liquid fire. The air trembled as a voice resonated within his mind. Neither male nor female, neither loud nor soft, but echoing from every direction. "You have come at last, bearer of the mark." The words washed through him like a tide, unsettling yet strangely familiar. Kyle steadied himself, forcing his mind into clarity. "Who speaks?" he demanded, though his voice felt small within the cavernous hall. "We are the Echoed," the presence replied. "Remnants of those who shaped the ages before your empire rose. We linger not as ghosts, but as memory bound into the stone of this world." Kyle felt images flood into his thoughts. Shadows of colossal beings whose forms defied comprehension, weaving empires of light and darkness across the stars long before humanity's ascent. Their downfall was violent, catastrophic, and deliberate, as though orchestrated by an enemy too powerful to name. "Why call me here?" Kyle asked, staggering beneath the weight of the visions. "Because the cycle approaches once more. The shadow that devoured us now stirs beyond the veil of your understanding. You have been chosen to witness and to decide." The throne flared with light, and Kyle felt the vault's energy reel him in. He tried to resist, but his body moved forward, compelled by an unseen force. The seat pulled at him until he sank into it, armor scraping against crystal. The moment he made contact, the throne sealed around him, locking him into place. Crimson tendrils coiled around his limbs, chest and temples, weaving through the gaps in his armor like threads of living flame. Pain shot through him, sharp and consuming, yet he did not cry out. This agony clawed deeper than flesh. It pierced memory, will, and identity. The tendrils dug further, sifting through his thoughts, unraveling them, examining them, and stitching them back together. Visions ignited around him, battles he had fought, faces he had lost, decisions he regretted but could not undo. He saw the Emperor again, tension shadowing the once trusted mentor's face. A fear buried behind composure revealed itself, not fear of war or rebellion, but fear of something far older, something cosmic. The Echoed spoke through the storm of images. "Your empire believes itself the first to stand against oblivion, but it is merely the latest. Countless civilizations before yours made the same errors: pride, division, ambition. All fell when the shadow returned. You carry the mark because your lineage traces back to the architects of the first resistance. You alone can awaken what remains." Kyle's breath trembled. Awaken what? The Sentinel, the last creation of the Echoed, a being forged to stand against the shadow's return. Its power lies dormant, sealed within the Crimson Vault. Only the marked may release it. The cocoon hummed, and the chamber trembled as dust rained from the ceiling. Energy surged through the throne, pouring into Kale like molten truth. He felt the mark burn behind his sternum, searing into his very soul. His heartbeat synced with the vault's pulse until he could no longer tell where his body ended and the ancient force began. "What happens if I awaken it?" Kyle forced out, teeth clenched. "You will bind with it," the Echoed answered. "Your will and its essence will merge. You will become something beyond mortal, yet burdened with the cost of that power." Kyle saw a glimpse of what such union might entail, a towering form of crystal and flame, a weapon of impossible strength, but also a cage, a life stripped of humanity, a sacrifice demanded without mercy. "What happens if I refuse?" he asked quietly. Silence crashed over the chamber. Then came the answer. "The Empire will burn. The cycle will reset. All you have fought for will collapse into ash." Kyle closed his eyes. He thought of his fallen soldiers, of Torrin and the few who still believed in him. He thought of the people across the Empire. Flawed, divided, desperate, but worth fighting for. His breath steadied as the decision crystallized within him, heavy yet unmistakable. He opened his eyes. I choose to awaken it. The chamber roared. The throne blazed with crimson radiance, flooding the hall with blinding light as the vault responded. The cocoon snapped fully open, releasing a shock wave that rippled through the stone. A sphere of radiant energy formed above Cale, expanding until it consumed his vision. The tendrils tightened, merging his heartbeat with the sentinel's dormant core. The Echoed spoke a final time. Prepare, Cale Varin. Your fate is no longer your own. You are chosen. You are bound. You are the spark within the coming storm. Cale braced himself as the energy surged. A thunderous vibration rolled through the crimson vault as the energy sphere above Cale intensified, swirling with molten reds and stark whites like a newborn star fighting to stabilize. The cocoon-like structure that had once encased the throne began to reassemble, not to imprison Cale once more, but to reshape itself around the awakening sentinel's core. Ancient mechanisms groaned to life, metal and crystal intertwining with a deliberate, almost ceremonial precision. Cale felt the power coursing into him grow heavier, hotter, until every vein felt forged from fire. His armor trembled, seams glowing bright as if ready to burst from the force surging underneath. The mark inside his chest pulsed like a second heart, syncing in perfect rhythm with the vault's thundering echo. He gripped the throne's armrests, his gauntlets cracking under the strain. A voice, not the Echoed, but something deeper, more resonant, whispered into his mind. Identify. Bearer of the mark. Cale swallowed hard. Cale Varin, he answered, though speaking felt like pushing words through a storm. Lineage confirmed, anomaly detected, flesh-bound host insufficient for full integration. Compensating. Kyle's pulse skipped. Compensating how? The sphere of energy collapsed inward in a sudden, violent contraction. It condensed into a single point of blinding light directly above him. The chamber dimmed, shadows stretching outward as though fleeing the blinding core. Then the point exploded downward, striking Cale like lightning. His scream tore loose before he could stop it. The energy invaded everything, blood, bone, memory, ripping through him as though testing the limits of his existence. He felt both infinite and insignificant, stretched thin across a cosmic tapestry of past battles, forgotten stars, and beings whose names had never been meant for human tongues. The Echoed spoke faintly, as if from behind a wall of fire. You must endure, Cale Varin. The Sentinel's power cannot be claimed. It must be survived. Light poured from Cale's eyes, his mouth, the cracks in his armor. He tried to move, but the throne pinned him in place as the Sentinel continued its intrusion. Another voice, colder, sharper, spoke from the vault's heart. Integration, 12%. Structural integrity, unstable. Cale's body felt like it was splitting apart. Stop, he gasped. I can't. Integration, 19%. Initiating neural mesh. A lattice of shimmering crimson filaments materialized around his head, sinking into his temples, weaving into his thoughts. Memories ruptured like fragile glass, his first battle, his mother's face, the Emperor's hand on his shoulder the day he was knighted. Each memory flickered, bent, reshaped, then returned sharper, clearer, almost too clear. He felt something else, too, another presence winding through his mind like a coiling serpent of light. It was ancient, yet newborn, curious, yet indifferent, tasting his memories as though determining his worth. Cale forced air into his lungs. Get out of my head. Cannot comply. Integration requires alignment. You resist. Of course I resist, Cale snarled. I'm still alive. Silence then. Acceptable parameter. The lattice tightened, and suddenly Cale wasn't in the vault anymore. The world around him dissolved into a crimson horizon stretching infinitely in every direction. Beneath his feet lay a reflective surface, showing him not as he was, but as a towering figure of armored crystal and fire. His reflection stared back with eyes like stars on the verge of collapse. "You see the possible?" The sentinel's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "This is what you may become." Kyle stepped forward. The reflection mirrored him, until it didn't. Instead of following his movement, it reached out, placing a massive crystalline hand against the barrier between them. Kyle hesitated, then did the same. His fingers met something solid, cold, and humming with power. "Our forms must align," the sentinel said, "but your flesh is fragile. Your will is the only bridge." The crimson horizon rippled with each word. Kyle clenched his jaw. "Then take my strength, not my identity." A pause. "Agreed." The reflection shattered into 1,000 pieces that swirled upward, spiraling around Kale in a vortex of razor-sharp fragments. They tore through him, not harming him, but slicing into the intangible parts of his being: fear, doubt, grief, pain. Each shard carried a burden away, stripping him down to raw determination. The pain faded. The vault returned. Kyle gasped, slamming back into his body with violent force. The tendrils tightening around him shifted from constriction to support, holding him upright as the sentinel's power settled in his veins like molten metal cooling into strength. Integration, 63%. Host stabilization, optimal. Kyle exhaled a shaky breath. The agony had dulled to a throb. He could still feel his own thoughts, his own voice, though now intertwined with an echo of something far greater. "Good," he thought. The sentinel responded, a low vibration, through his mind. "You endure." The cocoon surrounding the throne continued to rebuild, enclosing both Kale and the sentinel's forming core in a sphere of interlocking plates. Molten channels across the floor thickened their flow, funneling raw volcanic energy into the chamber. Every tremor signaled another surge of awakening. The echoed whispered once more, their tone now reverent. "You are becoming the weapon we forged and feared." Kyle flexed his fingers. The gauntlets glowed, strengthened by the power flooding them. "What comes next?" he asked. "Completion," the sentinel answered. "Then purpose." "And my purpose?" The cocoon sealed shut with a resonant, finalizing click. "To stand between your empire and annihilation." The chamber erupted in blinding light as the final phase began. Kyle held on, bracing himself as the sentinel's full consciousness unfurled like a star igniting for the first time. Outside the vault, across the citadel, alarms began to wail. Something ancient had awakened, and it was no longer silent. Across the citadel, the first alarm siren split the uneasy silence of dawn, echoing off obsidian towers and metallic walkways. Guards scrambled into formation, their boots striking the ground in sharp unison as crimson warning lights flared to life. The citadel, long dormant, long silent, now thrummed with awakening force. Those stationed closest to the vault felt the tremors first, followed by the rising hum of ancient machinery engaging after millennia of inactivity. Commander Torrin stood on the upper battlements, his breath fogging in the frigid morning air. The moment the alarm screamed, he knew the cause. Something had gone wrong in the vault, or something had gone exactly as Kale feared. "Report!" Torrin barked. The nearest lieutenant, a young officer whose face glistened with sweat despite the cold, sprinted forward. "Sir, energy spikes across every lower sector. The vault is active and something else. A pressure wave has destabilized the inner corridors. We've already lost 2 patrol clusters." Torrin's jaw tightened. "What of Kyle?" "No communication from Lord Varin since he entered the vault. All channels are dead." Torrin cursed under his breath. He had trusted Kyle to survive the impossible, but the Citadel wasn't an enemy that could be stabbed or outmaneuvered. It was an ancient labyrinth of forgotten technology and cosmic power, older than the Empire, older than human understanding. If Kale had triggered something, they had to brace for the consequences. A second tremor rippled through the citadel, stronger than the first. The battlements shuddered beneath Torrin's feet. A distant explosion echoed from the lower sections. Black smoke curled upward into the pale sky. "Evacuate non-combat personnel," Torrin ordered. "Prepare containment teams and divert half the guard to the vault level." He paused, glancing toward the higher tower's spiked silhouette. "No one goes in, not unless I give the order." The lieutenant saluted and dashed away. Torrin gazed down at the sprawling fortress city below. He felt Kyle's absence like a hollow in his chest. Whatever his brother-in-arms had awakened, the citadel was responding, and the Empire wouldn't survive another cataclysm. Deep beneath the citadel, within the sealed cocoon of obsidian plates, Kyle felt the shift. Even through the thick crystalline shell, he sensed the alarms reverberating like distant thunder. But he couldn't move. Not yet. Tendrils of energy continued to bind him to the forming sentinel core. The cocoon hummed as if alive, its plates rippling with a subtle, serpentine motion. "Integration, 78%, the sentinel announced inside Kale's mind. Kyle forced his voice through clenched teeth. "The citadel is destabilizing." "External conditions irrelevant," the sentinel replied. "Stability of a host is primary concern." Kyle strained against the restraints, muscles burning as he fought the cocoon's grip. "People are dying. You must let me move." "No." The single word crashed through Kyle's mind like a closing gate. Host mobility before synchronization is fatal. "For whom?" Kyle demanded. "For both." Kyle fell silent. The energy binding him pulsed again, pushing deeper into his flesh and bones. His senses flickered between the physical world and the Sentinel's internal plane, a realm of endless crimson horizons and reflections that whispered forgotten truths. "What caused the alarms?" Kyle asked. "The vault's awakening generates seismic feedback," the Sentinel answered. "Systems dormant for thousands of years resist reactivation. Structural instability is expected." Kyle swallowed hard. "If the citadel collapses, it will not," the Sentinel said, tone unchanging. "This place was built to endure the destruction of worlds. It will survive this." Kyle felt the truth of that. The citadel had stood against cosmic storms, invasions, and the ravages of time. Its foundations were carved by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Still, Kyle could not shake the dread crawling through his veins. The citadel wasn't reacting like a dormant machine awakening. It felt like a wounded beast roaring in pain. "Integration, 83%, the Sentinel intoned, neural channels stabilizing. Kyle's vision blurred as a fresh surge of energy coursed through him, hotter than molten metal. He bit back another cry, sweat dripping down his temples. The cocoon vibrated in response, plates shifting until they aligned perfectly with his body as though shaping armor around him. "You endure more than expected," the Sentinel murmured, not through words, but through resonance. Kyle managed a pained smirk. "You haven't met humans before." "Incorrect," the Sentinel replied. "I have met your kind many times. Most did not survive integration." Kyle's breath hitched. "How many?" 17. "And they all?" "Failed," the Sentinel finished. Kyle closed his eyes, steadying his breath. 17 before him had tried. 17 had died. But the Echoed had said he was chosen, not for strength, not for power, but for something far more human. Will. Integration, 92%. The cocoon shook. The entire chamber rumbled. Above them, stone-cracked and molten channels surged with chaotic bursts of energy. Sparks rained like burning snow. Kyle felt the Sentinel's presence swollen now, vast and awake. like a star opening its eyes. A sudden explosion shook the vault. Kyle's heart lurched. What was that? External breach, the sentinel answered. Kyle stiffened. Someone's entering. No, the sentinel corrected. Someone is forcing entry. Kyle's fear sharpened into cold understanding. There was only one force in the Empire with that level of audacity and cruelty. The Emperor, Kyle whispered. Affirmative. Kyle's pulse thundered. He's here. His vanguard has reached the outer corridors. Kyle's thoughts raced. The Emperor had followed him. He'd prepared for this. He'd known what Kyle might find, and intended to take the Sentinel's power for himself. Kyle clenched his fists. Let me out, now. Host not fully integrated. I don't care, Kyle roared. Integration incomplete, the Sentinel warned. Exit will result in partial disintegration of host form. Kyle's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. If you don't let me move, he will take you. A long silence followed. Then, integration accelerated. Energy surged like a tidal wave. The cocoon's plates retracted in a spiraling motion. Light poured inward, forming a halo around Kyle as the Sentinel's power fused violently with his own. Kyle screamed. In pain, in defiance, in transformation. The cocoon shattered, and Kyle Varan rose from the throne, reborn in crimson light. The obsidian doors leading into the outer vault corridors split apart with a thunderous crack, sending shockwaves spiraling through the citadel's foundation. Flaming debris scattered across the floor as armored figures marched through the breach. Their armor gleamed gold and white. Royal colors, unmistakable even in the smoke-choked darkness. The Emperor's vanguard had arrived. At their forefront strode High Marshal Seroth, the Emperor's most feared enforcer. His presence seemed to darken the already trembling air. A massive figure in plate thicker than a fortress gate, he carried a two-handed spear crackling with violet lightning, a weapon forged only for one purpose: subjugation. His helmet's visor glowed with a predatory amber light as he surveyed the ruins of the breached wall. Push forward, Seroth commanded, his voice amplified by the vox. Our sovereign wants the vault secured before the traitor completes his defilement. Behind him, columns of elite soldiers arranged themselves into formation, shields interlocking, rifles at the ready. Drones buzzed overhead like winged metal insects, their lenses flashing as they scanned for life. Seroth raised a gauntleted hand, halting the advance. The floor beneath them trembled. Again, harder this time. A ripple of light coursed through the obsidian tiles beneath their boots, illuminating runes long dormant. The vanguard shifted uneasily. What is that? One soldier asked. Seroth did not answer. He didn't need to. Because a moment later, the citadel roared. A sound like a star collapsing thundered from the direction of the crimson vault. The walls vibrated. Dust sifted from ceilings. Runes ignited in sharp crimson patterns along the corridor, as though warning intruders to turn back. Seroth tightened his grip on his spear. Vareen has awakened something, he muttered. He didn't sound afraid. He sounded hungry. Move. The vanguard surged forward. Deep inside the vault, Kyle stood amid swirling smoke and the remnants of the shattered cocoon. His armor, once standard, once human, now glowed with crimson veins that pulsed to the rhythm of the Sentinel's ancient power. Energy sparked at his fingertips, sliding across the metallic plates of his gauntlets like liquid lightning. Kyle staggered once, steadying himself against a fractured pillar. His body still trembled from the final surge of integration. Every movement felt heavier, sharper, as though the world itself had changed shape around him, or perhaps he had changed shape around the world. Status, Kyle whispered through clenched teeth. The Sentinel responded from inside his mind, its voice resonant, calm, and immeasurably vast. Integration, 97%. Host form stabilized. Neural alignment complete. Then why can't I feel my legs? You're experiencing sensory overlap. The sentinel form extends beyond your flesh. You perceive more than before. Kyle's fingers curled reflexively. He could feel vibrations in the stone, heartbeats in the walls, heat signatures bleeding through the floor. Every breath of the citadel seemed mapped across his awareness. He turned his head. The outer corridor thrummed with approaching footsteps. Heavy ones, organized, deadly. The Emperor's forces, Kyle murmured. Correct. How many? A pause. Then, 47 soldiers, 2 shield phalanxes, 5 drone clusters, 1 high marshal. Kyle's pulse steadied, though he felt an angry tremor rise in his chest. Seroth. He knew the name, knew the death that followed it. The sentinel's voice sharpened. He seeks to capture the vault's core. He is authorized by the Emperor to use lethal force against all successors of the mark. Kyle exhaled slowly. So he means to kill me? Yes. Kyle rolled his shoulders and crimson energy crackled down his arms. Then we don't let him. The vanguard advanced with practiced precision, shields locked, boots slamming in sync. Their armored march echoed through the hallway like a war drum. Torches flickered as they passed, casting stretched, monstrous shadows across the walls. A drone dipped low. Its scanners flickered red. Life form detected, it chirped. Seroth raised a fist. The formation halted instantly. The High Marshal took 1 step forward. He didn't need to wait long. Smoke billowed from the far end of the corridor. Runes along the ceiling pulsed violently. The temperature spiked. Soldiers lifted their shields, bracing. Then, a silhouette emerged from the smoke. Kyle Vareen. But not the man Seroth remembered. Crimson light traced the edges of Kyle's armor, flaring at each joint. His eyes burned, not with reflected fire, but with the glow of something ancient waking behind them. Small arcs of red energy rippled from his fingertips. The citadel responded to his presence, runes flickering in resonance. Seroth tilted his head. So, it's true. You have become the vault's creature. Kyle walked forward, slow and steady. I've become what the Empire needs. Seroth let out a dark laugh. You always were delusional, Varen. Kyle didn't look away. And you always were the Emperor's executioner. Seroth lowered the spear, angling it toward Kyle's heart. You've stolen power meant for your betters, he growled. Your sentence is death. Kyle raised a hand. Try. Seroth thrust his spear forward. Kyle moved faster. The crimson energy around him ignited, propelling him like a streak of light. He dodged the spear by centimeters, the air sizzling where the weapon passed. Kyle slammed his palm into Seroth's chest plate, releasing a burst of energy that flung the massive man backward. Seroth hit the wall with enough force to crack it, but he didn't fall. Instead, he pushed off the stone, launching himself back into the fight with monstrous speed. The vanguard surged behind him, shields down, weapons up. Kyle felt the sentinel flow through him. Engage, the ancient voice commanded. Kyle obeyed. He thrust his hands outward. A crimson shockwave erupted from his palms, smashing into the advancing soldiers. Shields buckled, drones burst like firecrackers. Soldiers flew backward, armor sparking, the corridor filled with fractured light and screams. Seroth roared, leaping into the fray, spear raised high. The citadel trembled with each clash. Kyle moved like a living storm. Seroth attacked like a force of destruction. The vanguard reeled under the chaos, and the walls of the ancient fortress shook with the fury of a war older than the Empire itself. The veiled conclave assembled beneath the shattered dome of the Auric Observatory, a sanctum once dedicated to charting the great galactic spirals, but now repurposed into a war chamber where shadows outnumbered stars. The storm outside clawed at the ancient glass, with talons of ionized wind, and every flash of light revealed the faces of those gathered, grim, drawn, shaped by loss and ambition. They had come seeking answers, desperate to salvage what remained of a collapsing era. High Seer Velara stood at the center, her robes frayed from the long march across the irradiated plains. In her trembling hands, she carried the last cipher, a crystalline data obelisk etched with symbols no living scholar claimed to understand. Yet it pulsed with life, carrying within it the final message of the astral regent before his disappearance. Around her, murmurs rose from representatives of fractured factions, lost fleets, abandoned citadels, the remnants of an empire now devouring itself. "Speak it aloud," demanded Marshal Draxon, armored in plates still stained with the dust of siege worlds. "We have sacrificed too much to come here and listen to riddles." His voice was a snarl barely held in check, a sound that spoke of mutinies suppressed, loyalties severed, and the crushing weight of command without purpose. Velara lifted the cipher, letting its pale radiance spill upon the cracked marble. The regent encoded his last decree into this device, but the cipher warns us, its knowledge comes with a cost. Once spoken, there is no path back to ignorance. "Everything has a cost," replied Magister Eltrin, folding his ink-stained hands into his sleeves. "Our empire is already ablaze. What more could knowledge burn?" The seer hesitated only a moment before activating the cipher. Runes unfolded like blooming flowers of light, casting shifting constellations across the ruined hall. A recorded voice emerged, cold, distant, but unmistakably the regent's. "If you hear these words," the message began, "then the veil horizon has ruptured. The enemy you fear is not the enemy that approaches." The hall fell still. "For generations we believed the Nullborn to be an external threat," the regent continued. "But the truth lies deeper. The Nullborn are not invaders, but creations, our creations, unbound consequences of our earliest experiments with psionic resonance. They are our echo, our shadow, the inevitable recoil of power mishandled." Shock rippled through the conclave, but the cipher was not finished. "You must understand, the fissures spreading across our territories are not merely spatial wounds. They are judgments. If survival is to be found, it lies not in battle, but in restoration. Seek the vault of first light. Within it is the origin of our sin and the key to absolving it." The cipher dimmed, its light fading like a dying star. For a long moment, no one dared speak. Then Draxon slammed his gauntlet against the marble. "Lies. Fabrications meant to weaken our resolve. The regent was compromised, perhaps by the enemy he claims we birthed, but others whispered differently. The revelation struck chords of fear and recognition. They had all witnessed Nullborn behavior too precise, too synchronized with psychic storms generated by their own relics. Doubts they had buried now surged like tidal waves. Velara met the marshal's glare. "You know it is true. You have seen them evolve. You know they mirror us in ways no alien species should." The marshal's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Elthran stepped closer to the cipher's dim shell. "If the vault exists, then its knowledge could reshape everything, redemption or destruction, but we must choose our path." The conclave erupted in debate. Some demanded pursuit of the vault, others insisted on rallying what remained of the empire for a final stand. Voices clashed like blades. Trust fractured further. Yet above it all, the storm outside wailed like a dying titan, as if warning them their time was draining away. At last, Velara raised her hands. "Enough. The regent's message is a beacon, whether we accept it or not. The Nullborn are growing stronger. Their last assault breached the Chrono Bastion itself. If we do nothing, collapse is inevitable. We must at least attempt to reach the vault." Draxon stepped forward, his shadow enormous in the flickering light. "If this is a trap, I will hold you responsible." "And if it is salvation?" she countered softly. He said nothing, but his silence was an uneasy concession. A decision formed, fragile, contested, but necessary. A small delegation would journey to the vault while the remaining forces attempted to stabilize the border sectors. It was a gamble with the fate of countless worlds hanging upon its edge. As the conclave dispersed, Velara lingered, fingers brushing the cipher's inert surface. She felt its exhausted warmth and whispered, "Regent, what burden drove you to hide this, and what awaits us in the vault?" Behind her, Elthran approached quietly. "Be wary, seer. Knowledge buried is often knowledge feared, and fear shapes empires more than truth ever can." She nodded, though dread coiled in her chest. For the first time since the Empire's collapse began, she sensed that they were not marching toward answers, but toward a reckoning older than any of them could imagine. The storm raged on, but the path had been chosen. Yet even as preparations began, unseen eyes watched from the fractured horizon. The Nullborn gathered in silent formations, their forms shifting like reflections glimpsed through broken glass. They were not idle predators. They were waiting, drawn to the cipher's awakening like moths to flame. In their collective mindscape, a tremor passed, recognition, anticipation, perhaps even memory. Far beyond the storm, aboard the drifting relic ships of the outer moor, ancient machinery stirred. Forgotten protocols engaged. The vault of first light, dormant for millennia, registered the cipher's activation and opened its sealed channels. A pulse of faint energy radiated outward, impossible to ignore for those attuned to currents of existence. The journey toward truth had begun, and so had the awakening of everything that truth threatened. The journey to the vault of first light was a gauntlet of cosmic hazards few living beings had ever attempted. Velara led the expedition aboard the Eclipser, a heavily reinforced exploration vessel, cutting through stellar storms that seared senses and turned navigation into a guessing game of instinct and intuition. Her small team, Elthran, a cadre of psychically attuned engineers, and 2 battalions of specialized guards, moved with deliberate caution, aware that one misstep could leave them adrift in the void or dead before they even reached the vault. The outermost field of the vault shimmered on the senses long before they could see it with the naked eye. A spiral of crystalline energy wrapping around a dormant asteroid. Its surface pulsed faintly, radiating waves that interfered with comms and scrambled navigation arrays. Even the ship's gravitic stabilizers quivered under the field's pull. Velara's voice echoed over the bridge. "We proceed slowly. Focus on reading the distortions. The vault reacts to movement, to intent. Approach as if you are a thought rather than a vessel." Elthran adjusted his instruments, mumbling under his breath. A thought or a lie? How does one convince a machine older than time itself? Velara did not respond. She had learned to trust the vault's subtleties, to read its pulses like a heartbeat, and the pulse had changed, ever so slightly, almost imperceptibly, since the activation of the last cipher. The vault was aware, the vault was waiting. Below deck, the psychically attuned engineers began their preparation rituals. Threads of energy extended from their consciousness, probing the field like delicate fingers. The first sensation was static, a buzzing friction against their thoughts. Then came clarity, a shimmering of patterns, sequences they could not name yet somehow recognized. Every neuron burned with the imprint of the vault's memory. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. "This is no ordinary repository," whispered one engineer, voice trembling. "It thinks, it feels, it judges." Velara nodded without looking up from her observation station. "It judges everyone, even us." The Eclipser crept closer, its hull trembling as the vault's energy licked its sides. Shields glowed bright against the influx, sparks flickering as raw power tried to seep inside. The crew braced themselves, hands gripping consoles as instruments wailed in protest. For a moment, it seemed the ship would be torn apart by the sheer magnitude of the vault's presence. Then silence. The field parted like water, creating a narrow corridor of safe passage. Sensors confirmed the asteroid's surface was solid, the gravitational flux stable. The vault awaited them. Velara directed the landing on a smooth plateau, etched with runes identical to those seen in the Auric Observatory cipher. She sensed the connection immediately. These runes were the language of intent, a bridge between thought and matter. Every step onto the surface resonated with latent energy. The team moved cautiously, aware that even their collective weight could disrupt the delicate balance of centuries-old construction. At the entrance, a massive door of crystal pulsed faintly, responding to their presence. Velara stepped forward, raising her hand. Threads of psychic energy extended into the runes, probing, questioning. The door shivered. Slowly, impossibly, it slid open, revealing an inner chamber bathed in diffuse white light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. The vault was alive. Within, the walls shifted subtly, forming patterns of light and shadow that danced like flames yet obeyed no known laws of physics. Time felt malleable, the passage of minutes stretching and compressing unpredictably. Velara's head swam as she realized that consciousness itself seemed to be mirrored and reflected back at them in the chamber. Every thought carried weight, every emotion left an imprint. Elthran spoke softly. "I can feel it watching us, judging not for what we do, but for what we think." A series of platforms floated without visible support across the chamber's breadth, leading to a central dais where the true core of the vault waited. At its center hovered a crystalline sphere inscribed with the same spiral symbol that had marked Kael'Varin. It pulsed faintly, like a heart-catching rhythm, and Velara instinctively understood this was the source of the vault's power, the memory of the sins and triumphs of civilizations long past. As the team approached, the sphere responded. Energy rippled outward, brushing against the psychically attuned engineers, causing involuntary shivers to race down their spines. Threads of thought intertwined with theirs, probing for understanding, testing their resolve. Some whispered in panic, sensing visions of civilizations rising and falling in minutes, stars extinguishing, and oceans of fire consuming entire planets. Velara held her ground. She extended her mind to the sphere, letting her consciousness merge gently with its radiance. A whisper echoed in her skull, neither malevolent nor benevolent. It was simply the vault assessing. "Why have you come?" "We seek knowledge," she answered, carefully, her thoughts measured. "We seek to correct the cycles of destruction that threaten our empire." The vault paused, a wave of light pulsing through the chamber as if considering her words. Then images flashed before her. The Nullborn, vast formations in perfect synchronization, mimicking the actions and strategies of long-dead empires. Entire fleets destroyed not by conflict, but by pattern recognition and psychic anticipation. And then, unexpectedly, Kael'Varin's figure appeared within the images. His integration with the Sentinel echoed through the vault like a resonant chord, a signal to the past and future simultaneously. "Varin," whispered Elthran. "He is here, isn't he? Or his presence is inextricable from this place." Velara nodded, feeling the truth of it. "His awakening has unlocked the vault for us, yes, but also for him and potentially for our enemies." The chamber vibrated, responding to the recognition of Kael's existence. Threads of light extended from the sphere, reaching toward the ceiling and floor, entwining with the platforms and forming pathways previously unseen. The vault was guiding them, not just to observe, but to act. The path forward was not linear. It demanded alignment of intent, clarity of purpose, and courage to face revelations that would challenge every assumption of their lives. Velara glanced at the others, the psychics, trembling but resolute. Elthran, focused, his eyes reflecting the white brilliance of the sphere. Guards, uneasy yet loyal, gripping their weapons with fingers white-knuckled. "We must proceed," she said. "Every step forward is a test of mind, body, and spirit. The vault reveals itself only to those ready to bear its truth." As they moved toward the dais, a tremor rocked the chamber, shaking loose particles of crystallized dust that floated in the brilliant light. The vault responded to Kale's emergence, to the Sentinel's energy. Somewhere deep within, threads of fate intertwined. The last cipher, the Nullborn, the veiled conclave, and the Sentinel-bearer all converging upon this singular point of revelation. And as the first hand of Velara's team reached the edge of the dais, the crystalline sphere pulsed violently, signaling that the final test and the ultimate truth had begun. The crystalline sphere at the center of the vault flared, bathing the chamber in blinding white light that forced even the most seasoned observers to shield their eyes. Every breath the expedition team drew carried a faint taste of static, as if the air itself had been charged with a memory older than stars. The platforms beneath their feet vibrated in harmony with the pulsing sphere, and the sense of time, already malleable, stretched and compressed like a ribbon caught in a storm. Velara stepped forward, her robes brushing against the floating dust. Each movement sent ripples through the chamber's energy field. The vault was no longer passive. It had become aware, responsive not just to their presence but to their intent, and every hesitation was measured and mirrored. She felt it probing their minds, testing their resolve, weighing their purpose. "Focus," she whispered to the team. "The vault judges not by fear, but by clarity." Elthran muttered under his breath, "Clarity or survival? How often do the two coincide?" His eyes darted nervously toward the floating sphere, tracing the delicate runes that swirled like liquid starlight across its surface. Velara ignored him, her gaze fixed on the paths forming before the dais. Crystalline bridges suspended in nothingness, shimmering with potential energy. Each step toward the central sphere required synchronization with the vault itself. Misaligned intent could shatter not just the bridge, but the traveler's consciousness. She had felt the psychic tremors of those who had come before, lost within their own desires, their minds torn apart by arrogance or doubt. The first step was made. Velara extended her hand, guiding the nearest engineer forward. Threads of psychic energy reached out, synchronizing intent with the vault's patterns. The engineer's foot landed on the floating platform, and for a moment, the air quivered around them. Then stability returned. The pathway solidified. One by one, the team advanced, each step a test of mental and emotional fortitude. The vault reflected not only their thoughts, but their deepest truths, amplifying them into tangible forms. Shadows of fear took shape in the air, figures of fallen comrades, failures, and betrayals. Some cried out in panic, faltering, while others forced themselves to continue, driven by discipline and purpose. Velara's mind was attuned to the sphere, threads of thought intertwined with its pulse. Why awaken now, she wondered. Why guide us here, precisely at the moment Kale Varine has emerged? The answer came not in words, but in resonance, a sense that the vault recognized the convergence of forces, that the Sentinel-bearer and the Nullborn, the last cipher and the conclave, were all factors in a balance it had waited to measure. She reached the central dais and extended both hands toward the sphere. Energy rippled outward, brushing the team, unifying their psychic signatures. The sphere responded in kind, opening like a flower, revealing a core that was both impossibly intricate and unfathomably vast. Inside, patterns of light shifted continuously, forming simulations, potentialities, outcomes of choices yet to be made. "Observe," the vault whispered, not in sound, but directly into their consciousness. see all that has been and all that may be. Images cascaded across their minds. The rise and fall of empires, stars igniting and dying in seconds, the Nullborn's synchronized maneuvers across countless battlefields. And then Kael Varan appeared, towering, glowing with the Sentinel's energy, challenging forces far beyond comprehension, moving with an authority that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Velara's heartbeat accelerated. He is the bridge, she realized, the conduit through which resolution or catastrophe will manifest. A sudden tremor ran through the chamber. The sphere's light intensified, casting shadows that danced like living specters. Threads of energy lashed outward, forcing the team to huddle, bracing for impact. A voice, ancient, infinite, commanding, filled their minds. All who enter must confront themselves. Only truth allows passage. Only the unbroken will shape the outcome. The challenge was not external. It was within. Each member of the expedition team saw visions tailored to their fears, their regrets, their ambitions. Elthran saw worlds destroyed by his own arrogance, decisions that had cost millions of lives. Guards relived the faces of comrades they had failed to protect. Velara felt the crushing weight of generations of oversight, of allowing cycles of destruction to persist when knowledge had been within reach. The sphere pulsed again. Threads of light reached toward Velara, probing her consciousness with gentle insistence. She did not resist. She opened herself fully, letting the vault examine her mind. It sifted through her memories, her intentions, her motives. Not to punish, but to measure. And in return, she glimpsed the vast potentialities of what could be done with the knowledge contained within. Paths of salvation, paths of destruction, intertwined like double helixes of light. The central sphere shifted, sending a pulse of energy outward. It was a test, one that required alignment of thought and purpose. The team synchronized instinctively, guided by Velara's focus. The pulse did not repel them. Instead, it merged their collective consciousness into the vault's resonance. Each step forward was no longer physical, but cerebral, a negotiation of intent with a machine older than memory. Then came the final projection. Kael Varan appeared, not as a human, but as the Sentinel's manifestation. Crimson energy fled from him, merging with visions of the vault. The Sentinel-bearer's presence resonated across the chamber, and the expedition team could feel the immense weight of potential energy, of power tempered by human will. The vault presented the ultimate trial. Could they acknowledge Kyle as the convergence point without fear? Could they accept the Sentinel as both weapon and guardian, capable of shaping or shattering everything they knew? Velara inhaled slowly. We must trust him, she thought. Trust the convergence, trust the path. With a deliberate gesture, she extended her hand toward the projected Sentinel form. Threads of psychic energy intertwined, mirroring the vault's own resonance. The sphere pulsed violently, then calmed. A bridge of stability formed, linking the Sentinel, the vault, and the expedition team. The trial had been passed, not by might, but by alignment of purpose. The room shimmered. Light coalesced into a central beam, illuminating the path forward. The vault's secrets were no longer concealed. Knowledge, power, and warning radiated outward, waiting for those with courage and clarity to grasp them. And somewhere, far beyond the chamber, the Nullborn shifted in response, recognizing the change, sensing the awakening of an entity capable of altering the very course of their existence. The vault had spoken. The trial had concluded. The final chapter, however, had yet to be written.